Very glad to be here. I'm Patrick Brown. I use he and they pronouns, and I am super excited to be in the Sangha that I call home. I was here a couple weeks ago with my good friend Dawn, talking about noble truths and all of the relative versus ultimate truth. And tonight we're going to be talking about places in the Dharma where love shows up. They were like, "Oh, Patrick, will you teach in February?" And I was like, "Yes." And I was like, "What's the topic? Like, am I going to be that cheesy person that's like, oh, talk about love?" But then I was like, love isn't cheesy. Love is real. So I was overwhelmed. And I was thinking about what the concept of love would be useful. And I turned it around in my head and I looked towards a Dharma lens. Like, what do I know about love in the Dharma? And I came on a few things that I want to share with you. I sat and I was like, what do I know about love? And all week when I was practicing this week, it started to rise. There were like two main points. The first is the love like in relationship with other people. And then the other one that arose was love in community. The first one is like where I notice, all the time, love, like what are the conditions that create conditions are necessary to have love between people, my family, with my husband and beyond, and I started to really try to dissect it and pull it apart. Like, what are the causes and conditions that create love in those relationships where I felt love? And I took a minute, so I'm inviting anybody here who feels moved to just take a minute and think about somebody that you love, who loves you back, and just take a minute to think about what are the conditions that really help create and support that kind of love. So the example that I came up with is my soul brother, Marcus. He's not my brother by blood, but he's my soul brother. And Marcus is somebody who really taught me, I've learned a lot about different types of love. Even though Marcus isn't a practicing Buddhist or studying Theravada, he definitely holds the qualities and practices a lot of things that I think show up in the Buddhist practice as well. I think early in my relationship with Marcus, we were trying to figure out how to be friends. And he really invited in this. He's like, well, I want to be conscious about how we communicate. I'd moved from Chicago. And so we were long distance. And we were trying to figure out, what does that mean? What is communication? What's important? And a lot of what we talked about were being intentional and taking the time to focus on what's true to share with each other and not just fall into this thing of we didn't want to have superficial conversations. We wanted to have fun, but we also wanted to be true when we talked to each other. We wanted each other to know that it was okay to not always feel happy. I remember that conversation being oh, you can be sad with me and we can be honest with each other about our feelings. That was shifting for me. It was different than I was used to. And over time, the way that we shaped our communication, it felt like a joy to practice, not exaggerating. So anyway, what started to occur to me this week was those are the practices around wise speech, right? So how does wise speech show up as a condition for Marcus and I that really supported, it was the underbelly and the support for a lot of the love that we grew there. True wise speech is, saying what's true, not telling lies, not exaggerating or embellishing or using toxic language. And that's not always easy. But by measure, doing that with Marcus was absolutely a practice that bore fruit. There were times when it wasn't we didn't have disagreements or fights, but there were times when I just committed to communicating in a way that I would be, proud of later. And that practice was a practice really, really helped. I think it's a practice of devotion and of love. If you turn wise speech on its side, the extension and care that we offer when we practice it really does create the condition for people to, in all types of relationships, expand and grow love. The second place I thought about it was with my husband, Randy. Without going on and on about our story, I do want to share that how wise mindfulness was another part of the Eightfold Path that showed up about, how hard it is in the world to be queer sometimes. It was two gay Black men, like finding each other and falling in love was not an easy process. There were lots of things stacked against us and lots of things internally and externally that really rocked our relationship. And I think, the foundations of wise mindfulness really showed up. So those conditions that were created. So the first foundation of wise mindfulness is being present and being able to touch deeply into that. There are certainly places where my vulnerability was scary and I wanted to run away. And when I was able to practice kind of wise mindfulness and to be present, even for the uncomfortable conversations or uncomfortable experiences, being present and not distracting myself. I'm a person that has formerly distracted myself with substances or activities or even just like crappy TV. But early on in my relationship, I remember wanting to be present. You can't always be prepared, but you can work hard to be present. And that was really important. And Randy did the same. We both had to practice that a lot, like letting our walls down so that we could show up fully. The second foundation of mindfulness is really allowing other folks to be present, right? So allowing folks to show up as they are. That was definitely, Randy did a lot of that. I had to do that. It was about, having patience and extending compassion. There were places where I had to really be aware of like how I was benefiting from his compassion that would kind of ground me, right? So his extending himself, his knowing that I was having a hard day, his knowing that, the anniversary of my mother's passing is a very difficult time for me. And so when Randy would acknowledge those things and allow me to be present, in our relationship, that was foundational for what we started to build. The third foundation is to nourish the object of your attention. Right? Nourishment can look like lots of different things and show up in different forms, but we literally were feeding each other. Right? There were times when, like, preparing a meal, there were times where, like, creating the environment, the right music, the right movie, the right touch, was very nourishing, and it was mindful. It wasn't just random. It had to be part of a trajectory of care. Showing up, wise mindfulness really undergirth and really held a lot of the connections that we formed. So we fed each other. We also found ways to heal ourselves, like from some of the scars we experienced out in the world. There were a lot of harms that, I had to be mindful of, knowing that Randy comes from, the East Coast and came out here and was the only member of his family out here after he lost his mother, like caring a lot for him and knowing that he wanted to be back in New York and feeding him and supporting him into feeling like there was a home for him here too. He had to extend to me, like there were wounds that I experienced, from being in traumatic relationships that he had to hold. And through that practice, we created these conditions that really were, they really enabled love. The conditions were created through these parts of the Eightfold Path that really are specific to how we formed our love. And I'm sitting with that, loving it and sitting with it and confused by it. But that was really what was happening. The other foundations of, the Eightfold Path that were, the foundations of wise mindfulness that showed up were, being mindful of each other's suffering, looking deeply and understanding each other, mindful of transformation. And all of those pieces showed up. And then even beyond that, the Eightfold Path, other practices that were present, I could talk for another hour or so about, how wise view, wise action, wise concentration, all of those pieces were really there. So then I started wondering, is the Eightfold Path really about manifesting conditions for love? And really, it starts to make sense when I think about it that way. I think when we are diligent in our practice and when we're rigorous, in following the path, we start to see conditions that build, like building blocks, and we start to plant seeds through our practice of what we want to grow. This idea that you water the seeds of the things you want to grow. And I think that the Eightfold Path for me, watering some of those seeds really helped to grow the love that I have for Marcus and for Randy and in other places and relationships in my life. I want to read for a second from the book of Essential Teachings, the Holiness of the Dalai Lama. He writes, true happiness comes only through vigorous, virtuous karma, the accumulation of virtuous acts producing seeds in the mind that grow into good possibilities. The way to eliminate errors is to give birth to the Buddha mind within us, the Bodhisattva. To attain Buddhahood, we must learn to practice the Dharma and to know what must be abandoned and what must be practiced. The precious human body is necessary for this. I was like, right, the virtuous acts that are generated by following the Eightfold Path, by being rigorous in our concentration and our focus and our gratitude and compassion, that all of those things really helped to create conditions that I'm living in now. My other contemplation about love was more broad. It was in the community, thinking about places where I've experienced love with a Dharmic lens. I remember being 18 and it was the World Trade Organization protest in Seattle. Date myself, but it was like, I remember that protest, like really being scared. I had been pepper sprayed and arrested and it got very violent. I can think of places in my life where I was really angry and hurt at the Capitol or at city council meetings. I've done some testifying and lobbying in places where I'm just like advocating for human rights and feeling like my voice is not being heard. Fighting for like really righteous causes and like just being denied access, denied being heard. And that really hurts. And I think about like those times, like what sustained me through, like how did I get back up? How did I start again? And a lot of that felt like this practice of returning to the breath, returning to practice. I think also I was able to tap into this inexhaustible source that I think is called love. I could call it hope, or I could call it, maybe sometimes I call it purpose, maybe it's magic, but whatever it is, it keeps me going. It's like that thing where we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Like when I tap into that, that feels like love, and that sustains me, expands me. When I think about whose shoulders I stand on, who came before me, and who's going to stand on my shoulders, right? Or tap into places the community is larger than myself, like that feels like love. So like, what are those conditions for a community where I've like really healed and felt love? And I can think about the Dharma, like love has a place, like the Sangha. I've been to tons of meetings and day-longs and gatherings at EBMC. I feel a lot of love there, like by slowing down and thinking about our reasons for being together, right? The love that I feel that is through connection, building relationships and having conversations where we plant seeds about what we want the world to look like and what will happen if we awaken. Together and individually, if we are all practicing towards the same thing, there's a huge sense of love there that I draw on regularly. So love starts to feel to me in those places around Kalyanamita or spiritual friendship. It feels like a resource, and it feels healing. It feels like a place that I really want to stay and expand, and it's worth my attention in practice. If you've sat with me before, I'm constantly asking, why do we practice? What is the purpose? And I think that, this week, as I've been contemplating about love and community, part of the reason I practice is because of this, because I want us to practice together. And I find a lot of love sustained there. And then lastly, there's a powerful energy in love that looks like passion and drive together. That love that shows up when you're dancing, at a protest or dancing in the streets. The laughter that happens in the middle of hard times and you feel like you're going to cry, but you start laughing instead. It's like there's an energy there that I think is love. There's a force. So I just want to offer a couple more readings that have to do with like where this love is and how we might consider it as part of our practice. This is from the Heart of the Buddha's teaching. Sometimes we feel as though we are drowning in the ocean of suffering, carrying the burden of all social injustice of all times. And the Buddha said, when a wise person suffers, she asks herself, what can I do to be free from this suffering? Who can help me? What have I done to free myself from this suffering? But when a foolish person suffers, she asks herself, who has wronged me? How can I show others that I am a victim of wrongdoing? How can I punish those who have caused my suffering? Why is it that others have to be exposed to the same conditions to not seem to suffer as much as we do? You might like to write down the first set of questions and read them every time you're caught in your suffering. Of course, you have the right to suffer, but as a practitioner, you do not have the right not to practice. There's something in there for me. If we practice, we might be closer to the freedom that we're looking for than not. It goes on to say, we need places where we can go to sit, breathe quietly, and look and listen deeply. When we have difficulties at home, we need a room like that where we can take refuge. We also need parks and other peaceful places where we can practice walking meditation alone and with others. Educators, architects, artisans, businessmen, all of us have to come together to create spaces where we can practice peace, harmony, joy, and deep being. The heart of the Buddha is in each of us. When we are mindful, the Buddha is there. We need to take care of the healthy seeds that we are busy watering them every day through the practice of mindful breathing, mindful walking, mindfully doing everything. We need to touch the Buddha within us. We need to enter our own heart, which means that we enter the heart of the Buddha. To enter the heart of the Buddha means to be present for ourselves, our suffering, our joys, and for many others. To enter the heart of the Buddha means to touch the world of no birth, no death, in the world where water and wave are one.